thank you everyone for coming later in the day here, but it's going to be worth sticking around for this incredible panel. So I'm Seth Martin, a cardiologist, specifically a preventive cardiologist at Johns Hopkins. So I'm a little intimidated by the heart rhythm prowess we have here on the panel. I have focused on technology in my work and have collaborated with folks like Dr. Tarakia in the HA Center for Health Technology Innovation, SFRN. So we're going to just kick things off with some quick intros of our distinguished panel here, and then we'll get right into the meat of some really, I think, exciting discussion around AI.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jim Malt. I'm a long recovering cardiothoracic surgeon. Have spent the most recent few decades of my career focusing on building next generation technologies, both on the monitoring side and ultimately wearables, as well as the data side and what for a couple decades we've talked about as algorithm development, but now we have a fancy word called AI. So we'll be talking about that a lot.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nino Isakadze. I'm cardiac electrophysiologist at Johns Hopkins, and my research focuses on leveraging digital health technology for atrial fibrillation management with wearable devices, smartphone devices, as well as AI.
And I'm David Albert, and I don't know why I'm up here. No. I'm the founder and chief medical officer of AliveCor, and probably the oldest guy in digital health.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mintu Tarakia. I have had a chance to work with all of you and still work with some of you. I'm an electrophysiologist, a professor of medicine at Stanford, but my day job is chief medical and scientific officer and EVP of product management at iRhythm, where I work to really sort of combine digital health, AI, arrhythmia, from the lens of arrhythmias, and thinking through how we implement things within care delivery with novel technologies.
Awesome. So we have quite a distinguished panel here. I wanted to start kind of big picture before we dive into some specific topics. I wonder, Mintu, we could start with you, if you don't mind, and then we'll work our way down. I think starting big picture, I mean, there's a lot happening here at the scientific sessions around AI. Where is this going? What is the vision for clinical care? If we think out 10 years or whatever time frame you think is a reasonable time frame, how it feels to me like this is going to change every aspect of research. I was just at a session using AI for screening, for adjudication, everything about research, but also every aspect of the patient journey. I wonder if you could just kick us off with your kind of big picture vision of where this is going, and we'll go down the panel.
Yeah, I mean, this is one view. We have the father of digital health here who will provide his view, but I think there's sort of four areas. One is diagnostic and pre-diagnostic, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that. The other areas which I think are in some ways as or more interesting, are knowledge collection and synthesis, right? So we handwrite guidelines very tediously. We write review articles. We do searches. We should probably use large language models as part of our search strategies for evidence collection, even in meta-analyses, I would argue, right? And so that changes things in the clinical setting in terms of gathering data, putting it together, and synthesizing it in meaningful, ingestible ways that provide risk. The next step is estimating that risk, so you get into clinical decision support. And I think there's a lot there. How you implement, we'll talk about, I'm sure. And then finally, we're in an assistive environment of AI, and I think that's appropriate for where we are as we're learning. But we probably will get to autonomous areas where it can run independently in safe spaces, whether regulated or not. So that's sort of how I think of it.
Thanks, Mintu. Dr. Dave?
Well, I would tell you that we look at the future as being generative. Generative AI has captured the imagination of the world, created new trillion-dollar industry that didn't exist 3 years ago. And I think we in medicine are just now, like Mintu said, figuring out how to take advantage of that. Whether it's writing notes, whether it's synthesizing charts. Remember when you used to get, I know you're old enough, the big paper charts at Duke and have to go through those? We have help now for doing that, and it'll get better and better and better. But I think, not only do we have the diagnostic use of AI, and I was fortunate enough to work with Paul Friedman, Zachi Attia, and the people 10 years ago at Mayo who started AI ECG work. Now everybody in every group here around the world is using their ECGs and developing models, whether it's low ejection fraction, all the things. But the notion of prediction, because if we can predict in medicine, we can prevent. And that, I think, we're all taught, you're a preventive cardiologist. That means you need to be a predictive cardiologist. And so I would say that, to me, is one of the greatest opportunities we have for AI.
And building on this, prevention, prediction, then there comes the management part. And we currently, in the everyday practice, receive this deluge of data from wearable devices, all different manufacturers and so forth. So I think what I see in 10 years is a kind of data ingestion machine where this data collectively from all these wearable devices is processed. And similar to our pacemaker ICD systems, we have assistive AI helping us to kind of re-stratify which patient needs to have data reviewed first and guide management. So I think in patient management, we'll see AI growing.
Well, I'll be a little more provocative. The truth is, what we're looking at is one of the most profound moments in the history of human health. And in school, we all learned about the Industrial Revolution that happened in the late 1800s and early 1900s that changed the world. Suddenly we had trains that could transport things cross country in short periods of time, and then we had the telegraph and the telephone. What we experienced, or at least Dave and I did over the last 50 years, is now looked back upon as the communication revolution, and the ability for these things called computers to be able to access information, and the internet to put that information at our fingertips, and then these handheld devices on our person to be able to have that instantaneous. What we're now entering into is what's called the cognitive revolution. And it's being able to take advantage of large sets of information and see patterns and be able to bring that information, distill it down into something that is simple and actionable. Well, if you look across, our society in every sector, which domain has the most complex and mass amount of information above and beyond anything else? It's healthcare. And for the past 50 years, even when we were training, even as it was, healthcare has generated so much more information than any of us could possibly fathom. And human cognitive capacity is 7 pieces of information. In the ICU, we're generating 1 million pieces of data per hour per patient. So no human can actually make sense of that. So what that means is that 99.9% of the information is just flowing right by our very eyes and not being able to see the subtle patterns of early deterioration. So now, beyond just EKG, imagine being able to bring in multiple independent parameters and all the labs and the medications and the ICD-10 codes and the genomics and the proteomics. Again, we can't make sense of all that information, but AI is going to change the face of how we practice. And we have a small audience here. Raise your hand if you or someone you know has ever been on an airplane. Raise your hand. Okay, good. Well, do you realize that from decades ago, whenever you stepped on your first airplane, you have put your life in the hands of an AI system? And that AI system is called the autopilot. And that autopilot, see, back when Dave and I were young, in the 60s and 70s, there used to be 3 people in that cockpit, and about 900 gauges and dials for those 3 pilots to do everything possible to keep that plane from crashing. And yet, in that era, 1 major commercial jet crashed per 1 million flights. It was tragic when we were growing up. And then something in the late 90s or late 80s suddenly changed. And if you look at the safety curve, it went from 1 crash per million flights to 1 crash in 25 million flights in just 5 years. And that was because of the introduction of the autopilot system, where those pilots are sitting up in the cockpit playing games on their iPad, and the autopilot is watching the data from 900 sensors on each GE engine at 120 hertz, and the hydraulic pressure of the landing gear and everything else. Those pilots aren't watching the hydraulic pressure in the landing gear anymore. They don't have to. The autopilot system will let them know when there is an anomaly. And the practices of healthcare is going to dramatically change over the next 10 years, certainly 20 years. We'll look back and laugh. Remember when we used to have to look at the heart rate and the respiratory rate? Why would we do that today? And that's what's so exciting here. But there are a lot of gotchas, and that's what we'll talk about.
Yeah. Well, before we move on, let me see. Does that resonate with other panelists? This idea of autopilot? How much autopilot are we going to be able to?
We're going to have autopilot, but I think in this era of language models, I think we're moving away from digital twins. That word is overused. To what I would encourage all of you to do is to create your cognitive twin. So get on GPT, have it get to know you, and prompt away and keep feeding it information until it starts spitting things out like you would, or better than you. In my case, it's always better than me. But at some level, that's success because you've created your own agent and own bot, and that doesn't have to be in a regulated space, and it'll speed you up. The scaling portion of that is to then scale that to do things across all of healthcare.
Great. So let's move on. One of the aspects of our panel is there's tremendous expertise from both within the walls of academia, outside of academia, moving things forward to the point of publication, products, scaling products in the market. I'd like to tap into some of the expertise on this panel in that regard. We're going to start with you again, Mintu, and then I'll stop. I promise I'll stop starting. Yeah, I'll stop picking on you as first. But I know this is a topic, this gap, the amount of publications and projects that happen, but often then end at that point and never make it to a scalable product. And it's really hard to do that. You have now seen that inside, outside of academia. We'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that problem, potential solutions, and then kind of open up to the panel.
Absolutely, and I think this will resonate for Dave and Jim and you and your startup world. Like this, when people tell you like, why did you go to iRhythm? Weren't you happy at Stanford? I was super happy at Stanford. It was an amazing place. I ran the Center for Digital Health. I got to work with Nino and Seth at the AHA SFRN that we were leading at our network site for, and we were actually creating tech and creating products, just as you see here, a lot of AI. But the challenge is the end game is podium and paper in an academic environment, and commercializing tech is very difficult. Commercializing software and models like AI is even more difficult. We have about, in the last 2 years, there's been 700 publications per year specifically on cardiovascular AI. Yet there's fewer than 100 FDA-cleared cardio algorithms in total, not even just cardiology, right? So how do you get these things into products? And the point of view that I have, which was actually informed by seeing the great work that Jim and Dave have done in their worlds with BioIntelliSense and at Qualcomm with Jim before, and Microsoft, and with Dave at AliveCore, is the AI needs a home. It needs a hardware home. It needs a platform. And until the AI has a home, it's a feature. It's not a product. And so how do we take these features, every AI algorithm you see when you walk the halls, and how do you productize them and get them to the masses? To me, that was the opportunity, and I think we can talk about how you do that.
Great.
Well, I would just say that we appreciate this. I think that the challenge is we certainly have a regulatory challenge. We don't know. Anybody from the FDA in the audience before I make some kind of really, really stupid statement? No.
No, looks like nobody.
That's good. 'Cause
I don't know him if FDA is.
It's never heard of me. It is a challenge. They are challenged, like the whole world is. You know, from whether it's a legislative perspective or a regulatory perspective, are there guardrails? Are there things? So they're making, I might call them arbitrary decisions about how to validate something. And I think we're all together wandering a little bit as we try to find the right path. And I think international regulators, they're even different. They don't. They know even less.
It's worse.
Yeah. So I think to get it from a paper to a product will require a lot of patience, and patience in the business of companies is money. So we're going to need a lot of money to get these things from point A to point customer, and I think that's, you know, iRhythm, AliveCor, BioIntelliSense, we've been fortunate, okay? But look at all these companies here. They're all seeking the same thing, to get their products through that regulatory hurdle and to the market and scale. And I think it will still be a challenge in a few years. And that probably, to me, is, you know, finding the balance between safety and innovation is a constant challenge.
And I'll add from the researcher's perspective. I think, you know, we have these great ideas. We do pilot studies, and, you know, we're not maybe like, you know, at scale aware that we need to engage kind of FDA from early on. What type of data needs to be gathered? What type of settings the patients should be enrolled from, to start from the beginning and, you know, make sure that the studies that are done, you know, even if there was like clear guidance, which is not, you know, to have this wide adoption of those practices in the testing, so that we create the data that then generates FDA approval and CMS reimbursement models. Because you can have a, you know, FDA approval, but if it's not reimbursed intervention, then, you know, you're not going to scale it. So I think there is multiple steps to it.
Jim, I know regulatory is a fun topic for you. You want to?
Well, I think it's back to the point that Mintu made in the beginning, is the difference between a great idea and what it takes to turn that into a product that can be delivered on a scalable basis and save tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of lives. I mean, that's what we really ultimately pursue. And I'll make the disclaimer. I have very, very close friends at the FDA, not the least of which, you know, Rob Califf and I trained together at Duke, and a guy named Matthew Diamond, who's been the medical director on the Center for Digital Health. They're in a tough spot, and we, BioIntelliSense, have now taken. We've had 5 FDA clearances for SaMD, software as a medical device, which is basically algorithmic, you know, systems. We're in process right now, and, you know, they are dealing with a tsunami of filings, and also angst, right? Because their necks are on the line for anything that gets cleared and then ultimately blows up and has a safety issue. So they're inherently going to err on the side of, hey, we're not clearing anything until you have overwhelming safety data and efficacy data. Now, having said that, we're in the middle of another one, literally in process. And what's happened, our first one got cleared in 2012. And what I can tell you is happening is the goalposts have been moved and moved and moved and continue to move, even though there's not clear guidance. And the most recent one that we're in process now, we were just talking a little while ago, I mean, we trained our algorithm on 20,000 patients and 100 million data sets. And that itself costs a little bit of money. And then we validated it on another 20,000 patients and another 100 million. And it was across 30 different hospitals, academic medical centers, community hospitals, had diversity across every single race and everything you could imagine. I mean, we're in front of it. And yet, for the first time in all of our FDA experienced, seasoned executives on the phone, they said, well, we're seeing a geographical concentration of your data sets, and we're across 9 different states. And they said, well, we're not quite seeing enough data sets from the Northeast. And we're like, we can't just give you clearance for the states where you studied. And I was a little snarky, and I said, so are you suggesting that we actually have to have data sets from every state in the country in order to get clearance? But what you're hearing is they're really under the gun to ensure, everything possible is covered. And what I want to offer, and there's a guy named David Rue, if you haven't met him, he's another cardiologist. He's the chief medical officer of Microsoft now. He was a colleague when I was at Qualcomm, and he was at Samsung. He's leading a group called TRAIN, which is really all about responsible AI in healthcare. And the key here is we've got to find a balance with the FDA where, it's just not feasible nor affordable, nor do you have enough time in the next 2 decades of your life to collect data from every state. So there's got to be a way to say, okay, this safety data is convincing, but we're going to have really what you call post-market surveillance is iterative ongoing safety over time. And that's kind of a responsible approach, just like with drugs. You have to have post-market surveillance. I think there needs to be more of that, because otherwise, really, Mintu, to your point, it's going to be harder and harder and harder, and you're just, it's like the spigot is getting turned off.
Yeah, and I'll give another view. I didn't mean to imply that the 700 papers to FDA-cleared devices, the bottleneck is regulatory. I think there's incentives and a whole bunch of other things. And the FDA has done a great job in enabling what they call predetermined change control plans to do exactly as you described. But I do want to underscore that if you are, and maybe this is provocative or controversial, this is the importance of making sure that the AI has a hardware home. That's how AI gets cleared. That is how we have a ton of regulated AI software as a medical device, but it's on top of our products. Our AFib burden on Zeo Patch is as good as an Atro lead. It's all cleared with the intended use of monitoring in the known population that we are known to treat, so that we can test, train, and validate on the AI in the intended target that was used. So if you have let's take EF, for example. What are the incentives? Anyone can make a low EF algorithm. It's not hard with ECG. It's not hard. How do you accelerate them? Well, you could sell it to value-based care and say, we're going to retrospectively review all your ECGs. You can sell it different other ways. But if you have it on a hardware home, regardless of whether it's a LiveCore, BioIntelliSense, us, someone else, you can take that in and have it around intended use and clearance. The second part is the commercial incentive to do it. It's going to be the hardware players in the space that have the agency, ability, the revenue, the development upfront to be able to marry it to that. So let's say we have an ECG widget, whatever it is, that can tell you if the EF is below 40. Well, right now there's no reimbursement. So you can say value-based care is a great place to go, and I agree with that. Is it opt-in? Is it opt-out? Do you give it to everyone? Do you talk to Medicare for the NTAP certification? Do you try to get additional Category 3 reimbursement? those are the heavy lifts that prevents the investors from backing standalone AI in this sort of early capital world unless it's tied to hardware. And I think three of us are lucky that we are tied to hardware because we can build this out. So the end of rant.
Can I ask follow-up question? So if you're developing those algorithms that have hardware silos, like you're developing your own ECG prediction for ELO EF, I'm developing my own, and then Seth is developing his own. Then it becomes this whole interoperability. How do we integrate data in EHR gets even more complicated. So what is the way that we can bring this? I think the future actually is to bring all this data together in some common digestion engine where we can develop algorithms that are interoperable, and it also communicating with the EHR. Otherwise, it's very siloed and hard to kind of scale.
Well, I think we're going to find out. The federal government could accelerate this. They could say, Medicare, if we're paying for it, your data gets anonymized and put into a big batch. Today, we've got everybody fighting about their own data. Large organizations like Mayo or Kaiser, Intermountain have some advantages to scale. And quite frankly, what the large language models, keyword large, have taught us, that more data gives you better outcomes, gives you better AI. And so, there are companies that are hoovering up data. Tempus went public with a great valuation. Anamana has acquired data from all over, but they remain proprietary, closed data sets. And I think the power, what we've seen, all these people developing low EF ECG deep neural networks, the power will be when we put a lot of this together. And I don't know when that's going to happen, but if it's not, by the way, the Hopkins, the Mayos, the Mass Generals, the Cleveland Clinics, the Cedars, they're all like this with their data because it's money, all right? And so I think this could be a challenge, and the only people to overcome that challenge, it's kind of like the only body who could compete with or could make Epic do something, is the federal government.
So this is meant as a provocative kind of question here. By the way, for the audience, we should have a couple minutes if anyone does have a question. But so just think about your questions. Everyone wants to ask one. But before we get to that, and we're going to start here with you, Jim, and go backwards. So Mintu, you get to wait in here and see what everyone else says. But this is the Gartner hype cycle, and starts with the technology trigger. There's the peak of inflated expectations, and this trough of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment into a plateau of productivity. And I wanted to ask the panel where we are now with AI in healthcare. You can focus in on a certain area if that helps with answering. I don't believe there's a right answer, but I'm very curious to kind of just see the way you approach this. Where are we?
Oh, it's very clear in my mind. We're on the far left side of this. We're just on the upward trajectory of the hype curve, and it's where we're at is almost identical. Again, being one of the old guys here, I was there in 1998 at the beginning of the explosion of the internet, right? And you had tens of thousands of startup companies had a great idea, and the inflated expectations. It's really fun to watch, and it's exactly what needs to happen. There needs to be a lot of experimentation right now, and a lot of exciting ideas, and then over the next 5-10 years, the winners versus the losers are going to start to declare themselves. But it's difficult because it's a different place than we were with all the internet startups, because those really weren't going to kill people. But AI can potentially kill a lot of people if you don't, if you get it wrong. So the safety issues and the consequences are so much higher, which unfortunately means, I think, it's actually gonna spread out that timeline. It's going to take longer, And which also means a lot of investors out there are going to have to be really, really smart about where they place their bets, because it's going to take a lot longer to be able to see the return on that investment. And right now, to get a SAMD through the FDA, I can tell you, don't even start unless you've got at least $3 million in your bank account to be able to put against it.
Yes, and I will, instead of like high level, I'll focus on maybe like a rhythm screening perspective. Both Mintu and David, great technology in terms of like rhythm detection, but in terms of like more so from like wearable technology, how to incorporate that in care. I think we're on the down line, and then we're definitely going to go up and have better ways to incorporating it in everyday life. But it's just like evolving process.
Yeah, I think we're going down the back slope there. Everybody's got a little bit of reality testing when it comes to AI now. We know driving cars is hard. I live in Santa Monica. We see Waymo cars all the time. It's a little disconcerting to see the driverless car, but it's coming. You can't just sign up for one. You have to get on a waiting list. It's here. I have it. It's not here in Chicago, though. It's in Santa Monica. It's in Palo Alto. But it's coming. We've learned. I don't think we're quite at the bottom. We may have some issues that come up that get us to the bottom. But I'm very optimistic that we will relatively soon get to the slope of enlightenment and reach that plateau of productivity.
I mean, if you're Jensen Huang or Sam Altman and you can fashion the black leather jacket like Jensen, maybe we need one for you, Seth. You're up front on the rise, but I agree with Nino and Dave. I feel we're coming down from the peak, not at the trough, based on the following evidence. It is much harder to get your AI academic paper published. The journals roll their eyes. They're flooded, right? There's like, okay, another model, next. And this is, some of you are still editors, I am, right? Capital investment has become very hard. Yes, there's macro environment conditions with high cost of capital and a whole bunch of other things, but a lot of these companies cannot get money to commercialize because the path is uncertain. They can't get early stage money. They're all having down rounds, so their valuations are less. We just saw Forward, a large health technology company that raised 100 million, shutter its doors. So there's a lot of metrics to suggest that we're on our way down, and we probably haven't hit bottom.
Great. That was fun. We have time for a question or two from the audience if anyone wants to step up. We have a microphone that can be brought right to you. Anybody?
Mike McConnell, you got a question over there?
If not, I'll keep asking questions.
Don't be shy, guys. Mike, come on.
He's not going to be shy.
Never found Mike to be shy.
Exactly.
He's got it.
Does this work? Oh, great. So one of the things that drives me crazy on many discussions around AI is people start the conversation saying, well, AI can't replace doctors, so we have to all agree on that before we talk about anything. But the reality is we don't have enough doctors. AI often performs as well as the best specialists, and AI can see things like, even though the technology is not hard, it can see decreased LV function from an ECG, things that humans can't see. So how do we get that off the table so that we can have a real discussion around sort of the pros and cons of AI being integrated into healthcare?
I push back and say, well, what does a doctor actually do? Because the people who say that often have an idealized, romanticized notion of what a doctor is and does. But right now, a doctor spends a lot of time on the weekends and at night completing their charts. So I think we do want to replace doctors in that capacity. So you got to reframe, in my view, what it is a doctor does.
Well,
I agree with that completely. I'm married to a rheumatologist. She says telemedicine rheumatology is not a very good thing. I got to feel joints. I got to look at them. However, she comes home and closes charts. That's what AI can do right now to improve my life.
I think we're maybe a little bit far from like replacing electrophysiologists in the lab, but it's definitely possible with the robotics and training robots with the AI how to perform procedures. So I think that's definitely likely.
Well, I guess if you look at over the last 50 years, all sorts of things that have automated, introduction of robotics as an example and then you talk about the autopilot. Well, if you look in the cockpit now of a 787, there's only 2 people in the cockpit instead of 3, and all those gauges and dials are gone. But the reality is, you need 2 people in the cockpit so that one of them can take a potty break, because the plane is pretty much flying itself. Now, everybody gets threatened when you start talking about automation in their career, and nurses in the same way. When we're introducing our wearable that's now going to monitor vital signs minute to minute, 24 hours a day, instead of once every 6-hour manual vital signs. And the important thing is, all of this, including AI, are going to be tools that make us better clinicians. We want every clinician to look like a genius. We want every nurse to be a genius who can see the crash coming instead of reacting to it. And the really, really important thing here is recognizing that the outcomes that we're going to get are going to be better. If we care about patient care, that needs to be the primary concern. But there is a lot of kicking and screaming right now. But you look at, if my kid is a medical student, would you recommend that they go into radiology to read breast cancer or mammograms? Well, guess what? AI is better than visual reading of mammograms. Same thing. You look at dermatology. There's a lot of things that are going to make that role different, and that's okay. Those people actually end up finding a thing to do in life.
Okay, so they haven't turned the lights out on us, so we're going to take one last question before we close out.
Thank you very much. I'm Dave McMullen. I have a question for the panel about the OPPS ruling that was made public by the CMS 2 weeks ago. So in this ruling, they did actually add ECG AI software to their coverage in an outpatient setting. So starting 2025, ECG AI on a 12 lead as software is going to be reimbursable for Medicare patients in an outpatient setting. And the payment rate that they've set is $128.90. So right now, there's only one low ejection fraction algorithm that's FDA cleared. Dr. Dave mentioned it. But I was curious, how do you see that changing when going forward, starting in 2025, if hospitals can, for the software only, no hardware needed, start to charge, up to $130. How will that change adoption going forward?
Does anyone want to take this?
Well, if you get paid for something, you use it. I mean, doctors very seldom write checks every time they take care of a patient. They like to get checks. So we'll think it stimulates. David, by the way, from Anamana, so who has the FDA clearance for a low ejection fraction. I think it's positive. Do I think it'll stay at that rate? No way, Jose. And not when I've had 15 people come to me with their low EF algorithms, all of which say, and because of Anamana, it'll be a simple 510K. So competition breeds better pricing for customers, but it's a good sign.
I don't think we know how to price AI in healthcare, because the pricing also needs to factor in downstream utilization. Yeah. It's not a diagnostic, it's a pre-diagnostic. How many echoes, with a positive predictive value of below, I don't know what yours is, but let's say it's even 30%, you're still doing a lot of echoes. And I think CMS is going to learn as they go, but it's a great thing for the field that they did it.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is if you use TCM, CCM, and now RPM as an analog, all of these new codes that have been introduced by CMS over the past even decade, and those going forward are going to get extreme scrutiny. And within 3 years, you're gonna see basically an OIG report, analyzing, is this efficacious? Not only efficacious, but what are the cost benefits to Medicare? And until, if you don't have the data to show a clear cost reduction benefit to Medicare, those codes are going to come and go.
Great. Well, this has been fantastic. I'd like to thank all the audience who's stuck around. I'd like to thank our amazing panel. Round of applause.
And thanks to you, Seth.
Yep.
We'll get you that black leather jacket.